Here's a camera you don't see very often, a Retina II, and you'd be forgiven for thinking that's a Retina II type 142, but as you'll notice it doesn't have an advance knob, it has a lever. This is the Retina II type 122. This was the first Retina II camera, and as an engineering exercise you could say it was a dismal failure. Very highly specified, but unfortunately unreliable and under-engineered, I think you could say. Had some interesting features. Had the film advance lever, as I've mentioned. Had a shutter release that you could stow away. Yeah, it's popped up into the operating position. We'll see if we can get this film advance to work to the extent that we can fire the shutter. There you go. And when you've finished taking photos, you simply held back this button, pulled it towards the back of the camera, gently pushed that shutter release down, released the other button, and the shutter release was stowed away. So no accidental exposures. This one's here for servicing. Film advance sort of works after a fashion. There's something not quite right in there. The rewind is certainly the problem. This uses basically the same method of rewind as the Type 142, and it's missing the magical J-shaped hook that sits in here and swings the little cam across and allows this to wind the film back into the cassette when you're done. So this camera's here, it'll be stripped right down and serviced, and hopefully it'll be a good result. I don't see these very often. I probably only ever serviced a handful. Something odd about the film advance knob here, that's lost all its chrome. I'm not sure what, there's a few scratches on there where someone slipped with a tool. Perhaps somebody'd made such a mess of the satin chrome on that from tool marks that they buffed that off to make it look at least level. Anyway, more later. I'll start on this camera, I think. So, first task, I'll remove the rewind. One of those screws is not an original. The other one looks to be in good condition. Take the knob off. Now there should have been a spring here, the J-shaped hook. I don't know whether the other component under here, the little latch, is present. There's a screw here holds a tiny cover in place. We'll take that out and see if the other piece is present. Oh, that handily just fell inside the top cover. I will rescue that later. So there's the little lever that would drive the rewind. That little hook is a little bit misshapen. The screw is snapped off. So probably what that means is that someone failed to move this to the rewind position and simply started cranking on this when there's a film in the camera, and of course something had to give. And when you're dealing with little pieces of metal like this, you can be fairly sure it'll be a little piece of metal that decides it's had enough. So, continuing to take this top cover off, I need to get the advance off next. Now there's a flats on the top of the take-up spool shaft, and this, I'm pretty sure, yeah, that rotates, that unscrews that way, clockwise, so it's left-hand thread, and that's just this top cap here. 2 screws here hold the lever in place to the shaft below it, so we'll have those off. We can lift the lever off. I think from memory we've only got 2 screws holding the top cover on. One at this end, much like the Retina II type one. That screw's not in properly. That's hooked up to nothing. Someone's been playing in here. That screw doesn't connect to anything. So that screw's doing nothing. Let's try this one here. Yep, that one does something. Now the screw at this end's interesting. In the first Retina II type 122s, this screw, you can see the large head on it, that formed the stop for the advanced lever. It would swing around 180 degrees. They limited it later with a stop here, so it could only swing 90 degrees. And that was done to, presumably, to save damage to the film advance. Right, so the top's off. There's the screw from the other end that wasn't screwed into anything. Basically it was down the side of this post instead of onto it. Let's just put this back where it came from. This is our frame counter, which sat on there like that. Now, there's not a hell of a lot to see here, to tell the truth. It's somewhat unconventional, but you could figure it out. Let's pop that to one side. Probably what you're more interested in is this shutter release lever button here. If you look underneath, you'll see that the release lever comes up, works on this arm, and the arm has another lever on the other end of it. So as you press on this end, it swings this end down, which would press on the shutter release in the camera body. And how does the stowing action work? Well, this lot's all in good order, so you can see quite clearly. Most of the ones I've struck, all these parts are so worn out it's pretty hard to tell how they worked. But as you see, as I move this button in the direction of the arrow, this little screw here comes out of action with it moves this whole thing down. See how there's 2 little tabs, 2 little points on this arm. I'll see you in a bit. Good. So here's our shutter release button, and you can see it moving that black lever. That black lever is loose on the shaft here. It couples with this other black piece here. And that back piece there has this attached to it. And when you press the button across, it disconnects the 2 points here, allowing that lever to move. See if we can get this sitting correctly. That's it. When you hold this back, it pulls the shaft back. It pulls the shaft back, and it allows you to stow the film advance down. And the 2 points, the points on this piece and the points on that piece, they drop behind each other, so that this is now locked down in place. And as soon as you hit the button, it pops back up into position. Now this is the first one I've seen that arrived to me with a pop-up release that actually popped up. Generally they don't, and it's because all this mechanism gets very sticky with old grease. So it'll all have to come apart and be cleaned. But this, I can tell you, is a good example. Hold that button across, push the release down, let the button back, and the button should stay locked down in place. That's good. I'm pleased to see that. That means a lot less work for me. Alright, so there's our frame counter disc and its return spring are busy jumping off. The rangefinder, you'll notice, is very much the same as the rangefinder on a Retina II Type 142. In fact, the whole end of the camera can be considered the same at this end. There are differences with the shape of this lever at this end, but substantially the mechanism works in the same way. That all appears to latch into position the way I'd normally expect it to. Oh, now here's something interesting. There's a little piece of metal there. I recognise that that's part of this piece. It should come up here on that lever. Okay. Well, that could be a complication. It'll mean I'll have to do work to that. And that almost certainly again is another casualty from some clown failing to set the rewind mechanism at this end of the camera and cranking on that rewind knob to rewind the film. Discovering there was a little bit of resistance and just putting some more muscle into it until they cleared the blockage. Well, they'd have cleared the blockage all right, they wouldn't have been winding any film back into the cassette. Okay, well, I'm going to remove the rangefinder first. The film advance mechanism here, it's a little bit unusual to look at. There's actions here that may or may not be moving as freely as they should do. Certainly this didn't seem to work as well as I'd expect it to. However, all these things are there to be discovered. Now there's a sign that someone's been in here playing with things. That screw is chrome plated. And chrome plated screws don't belong on the inside of the camera. Everything would have been nickel plated or black. That chrome, that means that's a foreigner. Someone's put that in there. It's probably not the only foreigner here. Can you see the top cover? Yes, is it going to focus? Thinking about it, yes. That screw there's a foreigner. These are all domed, what are called raised head screws. This one here is a plain countersunk head screw and definitely doesn't belong. So the camera has a bit of history. I want to remove the rangefinder first, so I'm going to unhook the springs on the rangefinder. To take the tension off things, and this piece here I need off because that connects to a shaft which runs through the top of the camera to an arm below it, which couples to our focus setting here. And I need that off. There's a lot of paint on here or lacquer being used to lock these screws, so I'm going to clean the top of this with some acetone first, get all that loose so that I'm not struggling getting those screws loose. So I don't want to, the screw heads don't look particularly pretty. I don't want to make more of a mess of them. That rattling is just from the free play in the movement. Normally, of course, there is a spring on there taking out any free play in the mechanism. Well, it's starting to look like clean pieces of metal. So here we have 2 screws that hold this top plate on. This is a lock screw here, this is an adjustment screw here for your horizontal alignment. So these are the 2 screws we're interested in getting out. Alright, this piece just runs in a groove there. There's a rebate in here that keeps this aligned. This is in quite good order. That screw at the top, that looks fairly mutilated. It's under quite a bit of tension usually. There's a lock washer under that. Oh, it's going to come loose, that's good. And that pulls this piece here up tight on the shaft. Now there's a taper there so that it locks on quite firmly. I'll take this screw out of the side. That's our spring post screw. That'll allow the shaft to pass through once I get the top off. And the top will probably come loose if I put a little drop of naphtha on there. And if I rotate it with my fingers, probably it'll come loose. Yeah, it is coming loose. Oh, it's tight. I think the top of the shaft's got a bit bell-mouthed. It looks like someone's driven a countersunk screw into it. I'm not sure whether that's the case. It looks a bit bell-mouthed, so it's jamming that piece on. Let's see if I can get a lever under there and encourage this off. How much space? Oh, that shaft's, yeah, it's not looking level. It's got a distinct lean in it. Let's see if this will come off. Bit of prying. Okay, it's off. And that shaft should push down. Maybe tighten that bush. No, it is loose. Okay. So I'm ready to lift the rangefinder off now. The rangefinder is held to the camera body with 3 screws. Right, let's have those screws out. And this should lift off. It does. Okay, so there's our rangefinder. It's got a semi-silvered mirror here. Now that mirror, I have to say, looks a little bit small to me. It may not be the original. I think it's a gold plating on there by the looks of the colour. It doesn't look that bad. It looks quite good. Now I can tell you from experience that gold will just come off if you look at it the wrong way. So I will be not wiping at that. And our film rewind is our main problem here. This one is broken. This is a very strong spring here. that unhooked. Do this screw, they're usually tight. That one is no exception. Let's remove that screw. Right, so this arm, it originally had a lever, a pin, which was attached right here, and that's snapped off. I can see the break, it's quite obvious. So yeah, that's sat there like that. I don't know whether it's similar enough to the rewind on a Type 142 that I could swap it over. I think I'm going to have to solder this back into place. The challenge will be, I might even have to make a new piece to do that job, that I can get a good bearing on here, a good width, so that I've got enough surface contact so that when it's soldered in position it has plenty of strength. I'm not convinced that I'm going to get an awful lot of strength soldering across less than 1 millimetre by possibly 2. So I've put the advanced lever back on here. Now you can see possibly as I move the advanced lever, this little tab here, that's a lever. It's sprung loaded, it's a ratchet, and it engages with these teeth here to rotate that shaft and advance the film. It seems to be engaging quite well, so that's good, that's a good sign. There's a small screwdriver, there we go. There's a collar in here that holds this all together, screwed down onto that shaft. Now the shutter release on the folding retinas, traditionally you'll be probably familiar with most of them from the first ones that had even the 142 that had a shutter release at the front, and of course the 141 Retina 1 had a shutter release at the front of the body, and that was traditionally the way they did it. This is of course earlier. The shutter release mechanism goes down at the rear of the bellows, down at the back of the cavity over here, and the connection down under here is different as a result. So the shutter release components are most definitely not the same between a 142 and a 122. The 122 is quite different in that regard. The shutter release is here at the back of the body. I'll remove that rewind from the body. I think at the moment that's quite stiff. Something odd there, and that might just be dried out grease. It's just as likely there's something else going on there. Might be grit. I've got to have that apart because there's a broken off screw in here. Those screws are not enthusiastic. Okay, let's have that out in the body. Let's have a look. Yeah, that's just a bit unusually tight. I think it just needs to be cleaned. I don't think there's a serious problem there. Now this fork, which engages with the film cassette, is screwed onto this shaft here with the sort of castellated top, and the little lever that turns this couples into one of those 4 slots. So I've got to hold this and unscrew this to dismantle this. I bet that's tight, because no one's probably had anything to do with taking that apart ever. It could be fun. I may have to make a spanner to engage that, just so that I've got a good grip on that screw at the top. Right, oh well, so far so good. I haven't seen anything that's an absolute disaster that I don't think I'll be able to overcome. Yeah, there's probably a couple of screws under, well, I know there's a couple of screws under that piece of felt. Let's see if that piece of felt will come loose. I think it's flocked paper. I don't think it's felt. Yep, that's come loose. That's the post for the frame counter. Frame counter dial rotates on that. This spring here, oh yeah, that was hooked up behind there. Yeah, that was hooked up behind there. That's okay. Okay, well, I will have to take great note of where all these springs go. None of the springs are particularly well formed. They all have an amateur look about them, like they were being made individually with someone with a pair of pliers and twisting them up. They do not look like they've been mass produced in a neat and orderly fashion. That screw there bothers me a bit. I mean, it needs to be a shoulder screw that the spring would roll around. I'm not sure what they've done there. It's loose. The spring's probably loose because the spring won't move if it's done up tight. Doesn't look very healthy. Alright. It's lunchtime for me.